So if you guys have been with us, well, if you guys don't know me, my name is Andrew Coombes. I'm the technical minister here at the Message Christian Fellowship, and Carl asked me to speak this morning while he was away in the States. So I kind of want to jump into it because it was a little lengthier than I wanted to be, but I do feel like this is what God kind of put on my heart the last several weeks. But if you've been with us for the last few weeks, Carl has been guiding us through a new sermon series called Cycle Breaker. And last week's sermon, I'll do it, Carl spoke about the story of David and his willingness to kind of answer the call and say, I'll do it, when it came to defeating Goliath on the battlefield. And although my message is a standalone sermon and not at all related to cycle breakers, I did find myself thinking that when David stood and said, I'll do it, that the decisions he made on the battlefield would cause trials later on in his life. When he said, I'll do it. And I feel like this is the same thing applies to us, that when we say, I'll do it, and we stand for something, or even if we don't, that life just seems to happen and throw itself at us, and we're just faced to kind of deal with the situations that they come and deal with the problems that we face. You know, whether it be your health, work, or vehicles, you probably have experienced unexpected journeys along your journey or in life. When you hear the word journey, we all probably think or relate to different things. And Kyle may think of the band Journey from the 80s, because that's his forte, or is the area that he lived through, while some of us recall road trips or adventures. I myself, when I think of journey, I think of myself being in a canoe in the middle of the wilderness with 3 close friends of mine in Algonquin Park. Granted, not all of us, may feel the same way about the wilderness or the outdoors, but the word journey brings a sense of an adventure traveling from one point to another. As we can all probably agree, journeys in life can very much look different from, mine to yours. But that journey right now for you might look like, running a business or going to doing a secondary education, or maybe struggles of raising a family and children, or dealing with aging parents. No matter where you are in life, you are living out a journey that you're tasked with. Journeys come in all shapes and sizes and bring us joy, adventure, and some of them bring pain and frustration. Whether we chose it or through no choice of our own, we're faced with challenges, uncertainties, and questions along that journey. In the last several weeks, I've really felt that God put on the word no and what it kind of means in my life. And after reading Exodus, I couldn't help escape the feeling that God was saying to me, life is a journey, and that journey is to know me. This morning, we're going to be looking at the journey of the Israelites in the book of Exodus and how God was using that journey. And more specifically, we're kind of covering the events of when God takes the Israelites out of Egypt through the Exodus event. But before we go any further on our own journey this morning, I want to just kind of summarize the events of the Exodus. And, because I don't really want to cover all 14 chapters, because that's a lot of reading for this morning. And I want to kind of save you some grief this morning. So I would like to, after the summary, we'll be kind of jumping around between, believe chapters 3 and 4. So we kind of be, back and forth. So I do apologize about that, but once we get the summary down, we'll get started. So let's begin with the summary. A new Pharaoh takes his throne over Egypt and is threatened by the vast populations of the Israelites. He is worried that they will conspire with Egypt's enemies, start a war, and inevitably leave Egypt. Pharaoh instructs the Israelites to be persecuted and turned into slaves, manufacturing buildings, and also working in the fields. To stop them from growing in such big numbers, he commands that the birth of a boy to any Hebrew woman is to be killed. Moses is born, and to save his life, he's put into a basket and sent down the river. And at this point, he's found by Pharaoh's daughter, and he lives as a prince of Egypt for many years. Later, when Moses was an adult, he commits murder and is recognized for that killing and leaves and escapes Egypt. For 40 years, Moses lives in the wilderness, gets married, and has a son. Starts a family. When Moses was on the mountain of Horeb, looking after and tending to a flock of sheep, And God calls Moses. And Moses sees the Lord in the burning bush. And God says to Moses that he has seen his people crying out to him and the hardships that they're enduring, and it's time to rescue his people. God instructs Moses to go back to Egypt and gather the elders and tell them what God has told him. Then after you tell the elders, I want you to go and tell Pharaoh and tell him that Israel is my chosen people, and I want Pharaoh to let them go, to free them. Pharaoh didn't very much like the idea of freeing the Israelites, so he punished them even further. Once again, Moses and Aaron approached Pharaoh, showing him God's power, and then requested that Pharaoh again release God's people. But yet again, Pharaoh looked the other way, ignoring the warnings that God was giving him. God would show himself 10 times to Pharaoh through what would be the plagues, proving to Pharaoh of the power and the authority of the one true God. Finally, Pharaoh releases the Israelites and tells them to leave. When the Israelites were approaching the Red Sea, Pharaoh realized that he had made a mistake and sent his army to chase the Israelites down. And with the Egyptian army chasing them towards the Red Sea, Moses parts the Red Sea, and more than 600,000 people leave Egypt, and Israel escapes from their oppression, and eventually that oppression comes to an end. So even though this is just a summary, and you can get a sense in the weight of what was happening to the Israelites, and the amount of oppression and hardships that they were living through, with this backstory set and refreshed in our minds, and when it comes to the title of today's message, Journey to Know, I believe the purpose of Israel's trial in Egypt are to draw them closer to God, so that they can know him. In the same way for us, I believe God uses journeys in our lives to draw us closer to him. For those who are thinking, well, wait a second, Andrew, the Israelites were God's chosen people. I mean, they had to know him. So how can you, say that? They really didn't, the whole process and the trials that the Israelites were going through was to teach them who God was. And I would argue this, that the Israelites knew of God, but they didn't fully know him until God made himself fully known. And to get a better understanding of this principle or this saying, it's like knowing somebody's name, but not actually knowing the person themselves. And to help prove this point, we'll be reading a conversation in Exodus between Moses and God. And to set the scene, God confronts Moses on the mountain and is explaining all the things that he's going to do for his people. And God tells Moses to go back to Egypt and relay all the good news he's going to tell Moses. In the middle of the conversation, we read this from Exodus chapter 3, verse 13 to 15. And God said to Moses, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am, or in some translations, I will be what I will be. And this is what you are to say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. In this passage, God gives Moses his name, the name Yahweh. And the Israelites would have known this name, I am who I am, or I will be what I will be, as this name is used in the book of Genesis by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And even God himself reiterated this in the scriptures we just read. Tell all your people that the Lord of your forefathers has sent you. The name the Lord Yahweh would have been passed down through previous generations, starting back from Abraham when God approached Abraham. Therefore, I believe God's name would have been familiar to the Israelites. So they knew of God because they were familiar with him. But in Exodus 6, later in the conversation, we find out that the Israelites were missing something in the name of God. In Exodus 6:3, it says, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to them. Didn't make himself fully known to Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. So from this passage, it seems evident to me that if God did not make his name fully known to Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, then the Israelites were missing something, that they didn't fully understand or have the full meaning of God's name. And that word know And really to find out what we're missing, I want to look at the word know. And that word know in Hebrew is yada, which means to have experienced. And there's an emphasis on the word as a deep bond or intimacy. So in other words, to know God is to have a deep bond through experiencing him. So when we read, by my name the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I believe God's saying, by my name I did not make myself fully experienced to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Lord did not make himself fully known. A perfect illustration of the word yada would be two people in the military having served together, and after experiencing a traumatic experience, allowed them to know each other deeply. And when we understand the meaning of know, then it becomes clear that the Israelites were missing, I believe, that personal relationship with God. And although the Israelites were God's people, they needed to learn who God was, or experience him, in other words. And God was going to use the trials in Egypt to create this bond and relationship with his people. And this process or journey, can be put it in this way. The journey of the Israelites through their oppression and hardships were taking them from belief in God to knowing God. To believe is something that we think or have an opinion on. Or where to know is having the personal knowledge and experience. And I think you can see the difference in just the language expressed here. You see, God is using the progression of moving the Israelites from belief in him to knowing him in the Exodus events, the things that they were going to experience, so the Israelites can deepen and grow their relationship with him. And when we are on a personal journey or trials in our lives, we aren't physically traveling from point A to B, but we're making a spiritual transformation from belief into knowing. Where God is our beginning point and knowing is our destination. And again, when it comes to today, of the title of today's message, and I believe that God uses trials in our life to draw us into a deeper relationship with him, where our understanding in him grows and deepens. When my friends and I were planning out our first canoe trip, the four of us got together, and this was a couple of years ago. It was hard trying to find a specific route to choose that we thought we can do. We had this problem. We had no idea what we physically or mentally could handle in regards of the trip. How many kilometers could we paddle and portage on any given day? Could we last 4 days in the middle of Algonquin Park through the elements and the challenges that we would face? We started off the trip with an uncertainty, but a belief that we could accomplish what we set out to do, our journey. But we didn't know that we can do it until we finally came into the exit where the truck was on our final day. We may have been sore and tired, but by the end of the journey, we knew something that we did not know before, that we could do it, do our journey, set out what we planned to do. But it took the experience to figure that out. To simplify this further, you grab a cup of coffee from the back of the table, and you fill it up with what you believe is coffee. To know for sure that it is coffee in your cup, well, you need to taste it first. And not until you taste the coffee will you actually know that it is coffee. And I believe this holds true for God as well. We need to experience him so we know for sure that he is who he is. To say that God, however, relies only on trials to grow us, would probably not be 100% true. As I do believe that God uses any situation in our life to grow us and to shape us and to mold us. But when reflecting on my own personal trials and the trials of others around me, I believe that God uses trials as one of the main ways to grow a relationship with him. Because I believe this, we are vulnerable and in need of help. To clarify, trials, it doesn't always mean that life is falling apart. That's what I think all the time. But it can look like roles and responsibilities at work, increased roles and responsibilities at work, adopting and maybe adapting to a new baby in the family, or even putting a sermon together. Trials are journeys in our lives that we have to overcome. But we usually only remember the hardships and the struggles that we face. When life blows up or I'm faced with yet another trial, my basic instinct for myself is always, why me? Why me, God? Why did this have to happen? What did I do so wrong to deserve this? And I can go on and tell you story after story, trial after trial in my own life that I have experienced. But trust me, I get it, the question, why me? For some of us, this may ring true for yourself. But when I look back on my trials that I've experienced, I realize that I was asking the wrong question to God. I should have been looking for the purpose. When we face trials and hardships, we should be looking for the purpose, that just like any journey, that just like our journey from belief to knowing God, we need to be moving ourselves from why me and moving closer to God, what are you trying to show me or teach me? And that purpose of trials, I believe, is this: to take our pain and uncertainty and questions we have and focus them into deepening a relationship with God. That through this process of belief to knowing, our relationship deepens through these three things: God's character, experiencing God, and trusting God. When we are on a journey with someone, it's typically a great time to get to know them. From discovering their dislikes to their favorite foods or hobbies, as the journey continues, you learn more and more about that person. And even if you've known each other for many years, you are still developing and growing that relationship with one another. And if you are married, you understand what this is like, to see your relationship deepen with one another, evolve, and continually change for the better. And like our personal relationships that we have with other people, God was developing his relationship with the Israelites. Through the events of the Exodus, God was going to reveal his true character, or the essence of who he was, to the Israelites. And to show that God is revealing his character, we are once again going to look and read from Exodus 3, but we're going to start at verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he fled to the flock. He led the flock to the other side of the wilderness and came to the Horeb, the mountain of God, where the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why this bush does not burn up. And when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And God said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for this place you're standing on is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this Moses hid his face, because he was afraid to look at God. And I believe this also reveals that he was familiar with who God was. And the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I am concerned about their suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now for the cry of the Israelites has reached me. I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I have sent you, that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. And Moses said to God, Suppose I go to the Israelites, and they say to me, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. And here God covers the game plan for Moses and the Israelites, setting the stage for what is about to happen, acknowledging that his people are suffering and are hurting. And yes, he will provide for them and the provisions that they will need to survive in the future. But first, the Israelites needed a better understanding of who they were about to follow. And when you think of a name, and what do you think of? Now, I could be wrong. Kyle knows a lot more about this than I do. But from a marketing point of view, you want a name to stand out. You want it to stick with someone throughout the week, and you want that name to convey who you are. Names are so important as they're associated with the reputations and the very characteristics of a company or a person. And when people talk about the Message Christian Church, what do you think they say about us? It's a friendly church. It's loving. They care for people. They just want to help people. It's a loving environment. Or do they say they're kind of cold? They're more interested in themselves than helping me or talking to me. Our name is our identity and character, and we get to have input on what people say about us as a church. And our name is who we are and what we want people to know about us and what we do. Our name holds the very characteristics of who we are. Only by living out our names every day do we get to prove that who we are is what we say we are. And both theologians, Brevard S. Childs and W.C. Kaiser Jr., both state that the verbs used, I am or to be, in regards to God's name in Scriptures, is directly linked to God's nature, authority, and character of who God is and was and will be. For the Israelites to fully comprehend who God was, they need to experience him first in person, to see God's character at work. And in the last verse that we read, God's character is listed out as a rescuer, redeemer, provider, companion. He's compassionate. And through the Israelites' journey of the Exodus and the trials of our lives, God needs to live out his character. He needs to fulfill it so we know and can understand who he is. He needs to redeem us from ourselves. He needs to provide for us when we think we have nothing. He needs to walk beside us in the tough times. And that is who he is. You ever notice that the more you hang out with someone, the more you start acting like them or talking like them? Like, I had this happen to me. You hang out with some people from Ireland, and all of a sudden you start picking up their accent. Or you have a friend from Minnesota, and all of a sudden you start saying y'all all the time. And I think we all know who we're talking about here. Carl, we do love you, wherever you are. But it's probably happened to all of us. But you ever think the same thing applies to our character? The more we see God's character fulfilled in our own lives, the more we adopt those characteristics for ourselves. For example, you get fired or you're laid off, and people come up to you with worry and saying, are you going to be okay? No, I mean, are you really going to be okay? Are you going to be able to pay the bills? I'm really worried for you. And your response is this: thanks for your concern, but we're going to be perfectly okay. Because we've seen God move in our life before, and he's fulfilled our every need. And I have no doubt he's going to do the same thing. And that other person kind of leaves and really thinks you're crazy, for having that approach. But you've seen God move in your life before, so something happens, you're like, you know what? He's done it before. He's going to do it again. That's seeing God's character in action from previous trials. But that other person probably hasn't experienced God for themselves. The name, the Lord, I am who I am, or I will be what I will be, is the very nature of or character of God. God says, I am a healer. I am a loving God. I will be with you. I will restore you. I am compassionate. I will provide for you. And I am a promise keeper. That is who our God is. And that list is long. But we need to be exposed to trials, what I believe trials in our life, so we can experience him, so he can come into our lives and show us his character. This experience of God would come in many forms for the Israelites' journey, but more importantly, would evolve their understanding and meaning of God's name, allowing them to connect on a much deeper level and understanding of who God is. And I believe in this case, the experience of God, the trial itself would be the fuel in that journey to knowing God. part of this progression to a personal relationship with God. We need to put time, just like any other relationship, we need to put time into that relationship to get to know the other person. I believe the same is true for God. But instead of sitting down for coffee with somebody, God uses our lives as a personal meeting place where we get to experience Him. And through this, our understanding of God moves from belief into knowing Him. And when I look at the scriptures pertaining to the journey, the Exodus journey, I can see God using the trials that the Israelites are in to build this relationship with them. And we will see this in Exodus chapter 6, verse 1 to 6. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Then you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." God also said to Moses, "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully experienced to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they resided as foreigners. Moreover, I have heard the groanings of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians, and I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. And I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord, your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians, the land that I have sworn with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord." What God is telling Moses in the scriptures, I believe, goes something like this. In order for you to fully know me and see me for who I am, you are going to have to watch and experience me. Not only am I going to bring you out of Egypt, the Egyptians are practically going to kick you out. But Moses, I made a promise to your forefathers, one that I am going to keep. I wouldn't be known as I am who I am if I didn't fulfill what I say I would do. For my reputation, integrity, and my basic character of who I am would be tarnished if I didn't do these things. All the things that I said to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I'm going to do because that is who I am. I do what I say I'm going to do. I fulfill my promises. Moses, you and your people will be known as God's chosen people, and that through this process, you will learn who I am. But first, you need to trust me. And when you get your freedom, the trials in your life are at an end. You will have personally experienced my name. You will have experienced my character, and you will have seen and experienced the Lord. The covenant that God made with Abraham was the personal experience that the Israelites needed. It was the meeting place where God was going to meet them. Because we have the Bible, we know that God ultimately fulfills his promise and leads the Israelites out of Egypt. But the Israelites didn't know this yet. They had their own fears, insecurities, and problems with that just through dealing with what they were doing or going through in Egypt. But they needed to learn who was walking beside them. Just like we need to learn who's walking beside us when we're in times of trouble. The Israelites would learn who their God was as the journey progressed. And as they passed through hurdle after hurdle, watching the Lord guide them through out of Egypt, not only was the Lord present in nature, but he was also visible to the Israelites. And for some of us, seeing is believing. And Moses saw God firsthand, up close and personal on the mountain when God showed himself in the burning bush, but it wouldn't be the last. Moses would also see and really feel God through 3 signs or miracles that he was going to do. And in verse 4, Exodus 4 and verse 1 goes on to say, Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." And Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. And I don't blame him. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out with your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake and turned it back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." This was merely no magic trick. This was God working through Moses, allowing himself to be felt and seen and personally interacted with. After turning the staff into the snake, God also would instruct Moses to do 2 other miracles or signs for his people: leprosy on Moses' hand, and as well turning water from the Nile into blood, just like he would do for one of the plagues. And as I stated earlier, not only would God be present in the trials that the Israelites were going through, but he was also going to allow himself to be fully experienced, or physically experienced. From the first meeting with God at the burning bush, or the acts of nature that the plagues would bring, God was demonstrating his power and authority up close and personal to the Israelites, Pharaoh, and also Egypt itself. God wasn't in a long-distance relationship anymore with the Israelites. He was knocking on their door, allowing himself to be known, yada, to be experienced in a physical way. When we see God working in our lives, we experience him. And this changes our relationship status, if you will, from belief into knowing him. To have the experience of God, I believe, removes our doubt and insecurities because we have seen him in action. We have seen him move. Our experience comes from watching God fulfill his promises in our own life when we have made it through our trial, and we get to look back over our journey, and we get to see where God was present and who he was working through, to recognize the signs and miracles he performed in our life. And at this point, we have a much deeper personal relationship with him, because we have experienced him heal. We have experienced him restore marriages, do the impossible. To know someone, we need to find out their character. In order to do this, we need to go through shared experiences. And we need to, but first and foremost, we need to trust the other person. And this process of belief to knowing God cannot happen until we first trust God. When we don't trust God, we are holding God at arm's length, stopping him from deepening our relationship with him. And when we don't trust God, we are not relying on him. And when we're relying only on our own strength, we are allowing doubt and insecurities and fears to have a lasting effect on us. And when you're confronted with a problem that you must deal with or a trial, and you listen and go along with your self-doubt, you are already at a disadvantage. That self-doubt becomes louder and louder than the voice of God, and we create a problem where we're already spinning our wheels well before we're even attempting to solve the problem. And what happens when our self-doubt or our insecurity turns out to be true because we didn't really trust in God? When the next trial or problem happens, we just have that much more overwhelming feeling of the fear and failure. God, why me? Why did you let this happen to me? I can't do this. I'm not smart enough. I'm worthless, and you don't love me. Instead of progressing towards God and learning who he is, we keep stiff-arming him, believing who we think he is. Moses as well had difficulty with self-doubt and fear in this time. 5 times Moses would challenge God with his self-doubt, something that we could all relate to. In Exodus 3, verse 11, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? But I'm not good enough. In verse 13, Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God, I don't have all the answers. In Exodus 4:1, Moses answered, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? People won't believe me. I'm untrustworthy. In verse 10, Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord, but I've never been eloquent, neither in the past or since you've spoken to your servants, and I'm slow of speech and tongue. I can't speak their language well enough. In verse 13, but Moses said, pardon your servant, Lord, please send somebody else. Finally got straight to the point. Send somebody else. I'm not qualified, Moses is saying. In one conversation, Moses tells God every objection and insecurity he had about what God wanted him to do. And God, being who he is, the I am who I am, assures and supplies Moses with what he needs to fulfill his journey and as well eliminate his own doubts. I'm not good enough. God says, I will be with you. I rely on me, and I am actively present and by your side. I don't have all the answers. God says, I am who I am. I am truly he who exists, and I will belong with you in every situation because that is my nature and character. People won't believe me. God performs 3 signs. They may not believe what you tell them or my spoken word, but they'll see what I do in physical form. I can't speak their language well enough. Who made you in the first place? I will speak and teach you what to say. I'm not qualified. God says, what about your brother Aaron? God supplies Aaron and to help him with all his deficiencies that Moses felt he had. And if you're familiar with the Toronto Maple Leafs this season, you'll recognize this saying, and I'm sorry for bringing this up, but trust the process. Trust that the system we have in place will work. Trust the coaching staff and the other players to do what they need to do. Just like Moses needed to trust the process of God. We need to put aside our fear and our doubt and trust that God knows what he's doing. We need to trust God when we are in our trials, to say, God, I surrender myself to you. God, make me strong when I'm weak. Put people in my life to help me. And Lord, give me the understanding and peace through the process or trial. When we decide to trust God, we will experience him through his character because he will supply us with what we need when we need it, just like he did for Moses and so many other people in the Bible. Any good relationship starts with trust. And Moses trusted the Lord, and God fulfilled his every need. When we bravely take a step forward and decide to trust God, we are able to be used for and by God. Trust is the glue that holds this process together, all of it. We need to trust God so we can experience him, so we can see his character, so that we are in a better understanding of who God is. Even though we've only looked at one conversation between God and Moses, this, I believe, is just the foundation of what he's doing in the life of the Israelites. After this, God, does take the Israelites out of Egypt, and the Israelites would understand who God is. They would get permission after the plagues to leave Egypt, and they're running, and they're escaping towards the Red Sea, and Pharaoh realizes that, well, he made a mistake. I want to go get them. So Pharaoh sends his army to chase down the Israelites, and with Pharaoh's army behind the Israelites, Moses, approaches the Red Sea, and God shows himself in a pillar of cloud and fire before the Israelites. And then when the Egyptian army is getting closer to them, God moves behind them to protect them. A cloud like a pillar of cloud and fire. I don't know. If I had that experience with God, I'd be like, yeah, that's pretty amazing. And then Moses would outstretch his arms and hands, and he would divide the Red Sea. The Israelites would escape, and God would destroy the Egyptian army. And God fulfills his promise right there and then to the Israelites, the promise that he made way back when to the forefather Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And through this process, guys, the Israelites knew of God. They had fully experienced him, seen them for who he was. Guys, that was the beginning of their journey. From there on, they would see many other trials where they would have to trust and rely on God. Like David spoke about in Exodus, the meals were such a big thing. When they left Egypt, they only brought with themselves just a small amount of supplies. They had to rely on God and trust God that he was going to provide for them. And every morning, what was waiting for them outside of their tents? Manna, dried substance on the plant, the vegetation that they would dry out and make into bread to sustain themselves. Guys, God was making himself fully known to the Israelites. And when trials come in our lives, three things, guys. We need to trust God so we can experience him and we can understand his character, to fully and more deeply understand him and who he is. Let's just close in prayer. God, thank you so much for your word today. We thank you so much for who you are, God, that you do have a bigger purpose for our lives, God. And even though life sometimes sucks and hinders us, and we feel like we're just always living on a battleground, God, and when we face those battles and those trials in our life, God, please help us to understand who you are. Help us acknowledge you. Help us know you more and see you in our lives. God, help us give you control. God, help us learn to trust you in the times, in the uncertain times, in the rough times of our life. God, may we see you and experience you in our life to better understand and deepen our knowledge of who you are. God, that we can see your promises fulfilled in our lives. And we just pray this in your name. Amen. So I just ask the ushers to come up and hand out the offering baskets if you're visiting with us. You're by no regards held or obligated to give. If you want to, if you feel led to, then that's fantastic. Really, it's for the people that call us home. And we'll just pray over the offering, and after that, the worship team will lead us in our last song. God, thank you so much for today, for this church, and allowing us to be able to hear your word and just to experience you in all facets of our life, in volunteering and just seeing you work in other people's lives and our lives. God, we pray, Lord, that the offering that we're going to about to accept, God, would only help us and deepen our relationship with you in our community, God, that we can show our community who you are. Thank you so much.